Devon might be known for its serene lifestyle and close-knit communities, but there are times when something unexpected happens, something that reminds us there's always more beneath the surface. Imagine feeling an unexpected chill as you sit in your cozy living room or catching a glimpse of something out of the corner of your eye while tending to your garden. These moments happen right in front of you. In ordinary settings, the extraordinary can slip in quietly, leaving us with more questions than answers. These 10 stories give Devon an unsettling vibe about how strange experiences feel so close to our everyday lives and how frequently they're shared by folks who never thought they'd find themselves in such situations. Let's begin. Abbotsham is a charming little village in Devon, where the buildings are sparse, the streets are peaceful, and sounds travel easily, especially at night. The local Thatched inn has always been a familiar spot for both locals and regular visitors. It's a place where every local knows the layout and routine. When the inn is closed and quiet, even the smallest creak or movement stands out, making any unexpected noise really noticeable. However, the staff noticed something strange. They often heard footsteps throughout the building, even when no one else was around. Curious about these mysterious noises, they would check the premises each time. But no matter how thorough their searches were, they never found anything out of place. Each time, the building was confirmed to be completely empty. It left everyone wondering just who, or what, was making those footsteps in an otherwise quiet space. There was a sound at the inn that stood out even more than the footsteps. People often reported hearing a curious clinking noise coming from an empty room, almost like glasses being moved around or gently tapped together. It was such a distinct sound that it felt like something was happening. Yet whenever anyone went to check it out, everything was just as it should be, untouched and in perfect order. Those sounds weren't just a one-time occurrence. They happened repeatedly, becoming so familiar that nobody was surprised when they were mentioned. Interestingly, there were no reports of anything being thrown or damaged, just this ongoing sense of something being present, all conveyed through sound alone. The absence of any escalation or clear cause left the staff scratching their heads, with no explanation other than the realization that these noises didn't fit with the usual activities in the building. The building was built in the 15th century, originally 3 cottages before becoming a pub. It is also reported to have its own resident ghost, believed to be a former customer who regularly met his partner at the pub, a taxi driver who tragically died after driving over a nearby cliff. What stands out about this account isn't the fear or drama you might expect, but rather how ordinary everything feels, even in light of what happened. The inn carried on just like it always did, and the sounds that were reported didn't escalate into anything more alarming. Instead, the clinking of glasses became just another curious detail tied to a familiar spot, something so subtle that people could easily overlook it, yet memorable enough to stick in their minds. Ashburton is a charming market town with a rich history steeped in trade, travel, and community spirit. You can really see this heritage reflected in its older pubs, which have unique layouts and structures that tell stories of the past. Take the Bay Horse Pub, for instance. It's one of those buildings that feels alive with history, featuring upper rooms and narrow stairways that have seen many changes over the years. The pub closed for a while from July 2022 and reopened under new management in May 2025. What's fascinating is how sounds travel throughout the building, especially after hours. Once the doors close for the night, even the slightest noise seems to echo in surprising ways. It's as if the walls themselves are sharing secrets from days gone by. In the upper part of the building, staff and residents have been hearing something quite unsettling, a child crying. This isn't just any faint sound, it's clear and distinct, standing out from the usual creaks and groans that come with an older structure. Those who've heard it describe the sobbing as filled with genuine distress, rather than playful giggles or laughter. It's a sound that immediately grabs your attention and makes you want to find out where it's coming from. People have also heard footsteps along the corridors and across the floors, indicating that something or someone might be moving about. When investigators checked these rooms, they found them completely empty. There was no evidence at all that anyone had been there recently. It's quite mysterious, leaving everyone wondering what could really be happening in those upper spaces. Interestingly, no one ever reported seeing anything unusual. What sets this account apart is its straightforwardness. There are no wild twists or intense moments. Instead, it relies solely on sound to create a sense of presence. The sounds of sobbing and footsteps don't disrupt the building's purpose or escalate into chaos. Rather, they quietly shape our understanding of the upper rooms. These sounds feel like a gentle interruption, a mysterious experience that lingers in memory because it keeps returning without any clear reason. Abbotskerswell is a small Devon village shaped by long continuity, with roads and boundaries that follow routes laid down centuries earlier. At one time, the area around St. Augustine's Priory formed the centre of religious life in the village, though the priory itself is now retirement apartments. In the 19th century, reports emerged of a monk being seen along the roads near the former priory site. The figure was described moving calmly through the area, not appearing suddenly or behaving erratically, but fading gradually as it walked, as though its presence weakened rather than ended abruptly. There are no detailed descriptions of clothing or features, only the consistent identification of the figure as monastic in nature. The reports appear as brief observations rather than dramatic encounters, recorded because of their consistency rather than their intensity. Over time, the accounts faded, much like the figure itself, and were eventually regarded as part of the village's past rather than an ongoing presence. More than a century later, the area was linked to another reported apparition. In 2015, a phantom nun was said to have been seen in the same general location, returning attention to the ground once occupied by the priory. The account does not describe repetition or further activity, only a single sighting that echoed the earlier reports without expanding upon them. What remains of the story is not a continuing haunting, but a pattern of appearances separated by long periods of silence. The monk and the nun are remembered not for what they did, but for where they were seen, both connected to a site that no longer exists in physical form. In this way, the accounts suggest that the ground itself retained an association long after the buildings were gone, allowing brief impressions to surface and fade again without explanation. Please feel free to add your thoughts and suggestions to these sightings in the comments. Ashprington is a small Devon village where social life has long centred on the local inn, a place used not only for drinking but for lodging, meetings and shelter. The Waterman's Arms stands as part of that tradition, its rooms and corridors shaped by repeated use over generations. As with many older public houses, changes in ownership and purpose did little to alter the structure itself, leaving spaces that retained their character even as time moved on. Within the building, reports began to circulate of a female presence known locally as Emily. Witnesses described seeing a young woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, appearing briefly in rooms or corridors before fading from view. These sightings were not accompanied by noise or disturbance, and the figure did not interact with those who noticed her, remaining detached and silent throughout each appearance. Alongside the visual sightings, there were also reports of doors opening or closing without obvious cause. These movements were not forceful or sudden, but gentle enough to be noticed rather than alarming. Staff and guests found no signs of tampering or drafts, and the activity did not follow a pattern that could be easily anticipated or explained. The figure of Emily was not associated with any single room or event, but appeared intermittently throughout the building. There were no reports of fear or threat linked to her presence, only a sense of being observed or accompanied for a brief moment. The lack of escalation or repetition kept the accounts restrained, recorded because they recurred rather than because they intensified. The story is a series of small, consistent observations rather than a dramatic haunting. Emily is remembered as a presence tied to the inn itself, appearing quietly and leaving without consequence. The reports do not attempt to explain who she was or why she appeared, only that her figure became part of how the building was understood, another detail absorbed into a place shaped by long familiarity and routine. Have you ever stayed in a country pub and experienced anything? Please tell us about it in the comments. Ashwater lies in a sparsely populated part of Devon, where farms are often separated by long stretches of lane and open land. Buildings in the area are functional rather than decorative, shaped by agricultural use and daily routine rather than visitors. On working land like this, unexpected movement is usually noticed immediately, as people are accustomed to knowing who should and should not be present. In 2022, a farmhand reported seeing a man standing near one of the farm buildings. The figure was described as an adult male, clearly visible and close enough to be identified as human rather than shadow or reflection. There was nothing unusual in his posture or position, and nothing about his appearance suggested distress or urgency. When he looked away briefly and then returned their attention to the same spot, the man was no longer there. The area was open and offered no immediate cover, and there was no sound of movement, footsteps, or doors opening or closing. The farmhand searched the surrounding area, expecting to find someone who had simply moved out of sight. No one was found, and there was no indication that a person had passed through the space moments earlier. What distinguishes this account is its simplicity and timing. There was no warning, no accompanying sound, and no repeated activity after the event. The report rests entirely on a brief observation, followed by an unexplained absence, recorded because it occurred in a place where unexpected presence was unlikely and disappearance should not have been possible. The incident did not develop further, but remained fixed as a single moment that resisted explanation. Portledge Manor stands in the parish of Alwington, its history stretching back centuries through periods of private ownership and domestic use. The building itself is large but restrained, set within open Devon countryside and shaped more by continuity than grandeur. Like many old houses of its kind, its internal sounds are familiar to those who live there, with doors, floors, and fittings behaving in ways that become predictable over time. Among the reports associated with the manor is the sound of a bell ringing inside the house when no one is present to ring it. The bell is described as clear enough to be recognized immediately. Those who heard it were certain the sound came from within the building itself, rather than from nearby land or neighboring properties. What gives the sound its significance is not how often it was heard, but what followed. On each occasion that the bell reportedly rang, news of a death soon arrived, sometimes involving someone connected to the household, and sometimes occurring at a distance. The timing was close enough that the sound came to be regarded not as coincidence, but as a recurring sign linked to loss. There were no reports of visual apparitions accompanying the sound, and no attempt was made to explain how or why the bell should behave in this way. The sound was remembered because it was followed by confirmation. Over time, the bell became part of how the manor was understood, a quiet signal that something elsewhere had already changed, leaving those who heard it with knowledge of what was to follow. South Efford House stands in rural Devon, set apart from surrounding villages and reached by lanes. The house has passed through different periods of occupation and neglect, but its structure and isolation have remained constant. Properties of this kind tend to gather stories over time, not because of dramatic events, but because their quietness allows memory to settle. According to records, a servant employed at the house took his own life by hanging. No detailed circumstances are given beyond the act itself, and there is no suggestion of public attention or immediate notoriety at the time. The event entered local memory quietly, preserved more by retelling than by written account. Years later, reports began to surface of a figure seen within the house. Witnesses described the apparition as a man suspended above the floor, his posture consistent with hanging, and appeared only briefly before vanishing from sight. What gives the account its weight is its consistency with the original event. The apparition is remembered not as an active presence, but as a fixed image, repeating the manner of death rather than responding to the living. The story does not resolve or develop beyond this, remaining tied to the house as a reminder of something that occurred once and was never fully absorbed or forgotten. Alla is a small Devon village where modern housing sits alongside older roots and boundaries, creating spaces that feel ordinary and lived in rather than historic or remote. The flat connected to this account was not unusual in appearance or layout. For those living there, the space was defined by routine and familiarity rather than expectation of anything out of place. Reports began with the appearance of a figure described as a misty or vapor-like man seen within the flat. The sightings were not confined to a single room and did not follow a predictable pattern. The figure appeared intermittently, sometimes near doorways or within shared spaces. Those who witnessed it did not report fear in the moment, but unease rooted in how clearly the figure appeared and how quickly it vanished. As the appearances continued, steps were taken to address the situation rather than dismiss it. An exorcism was carried out in the flat, after which the activity was said to have stopped. There are no reports describing the ritual itself in detail, only the outcome, which was recorded as an end to the sightings within that space. After the exorcism, reports emerged that similar manifestations were experienced in nearby areas, suggesting that the disturbance did not end entirely, but shifted location, leaving behind a space that returned to normal while uncertainty remained elsewhere. Appledore is a coastal town shaped by tides, routine, and long familiarity, where homes are often passed through families and interiors change little over time. The house connected to this tale was not treated as unusual by those who lived there, and its contents were ordinary, consisting largely of everyday furnishings and decorative items accumulated gradually over many years. Within the house, a recurring disturbance began to center on porcelain objects. Plates, figurines, and ornaments were reported to move from their original positions, sometimes found displaced and sometimes broken. When these incidents occurred, they were not attributed to vibration, handling, or accidental contact, as the items were often stored securely before being disturbed. The activity did not happen continuously, but returned at the same time each year, creating a seasonal pattern rather than a constant presence. During these periods, porcelain items were repeatedly affected, while other objects remained untouched. The selective nature of the disturbance drew attention to the material itself rather than the room or occupants. There were no reports of voices, apparitions, or direct interaction accompanying the movement of the objects. The disturbance was defined entirely by its physical effect and its repetition over time. Once the period passed, the activity ceased, and the house returned to normal until the following year. The disturbance did not grow stronger, nor did it spread beyond the house, but returned predictably, affecting the same type of objects each time. The story remains unresolved, recorded not because of fear or spectacle, but because of its regularity and the lack of explanation for why it occurred at all. In the early 20th century, Ashburton was a market town shaped by routine and familiarity, where evenings were marked by low light and limited activity after dark. Artificial illumination was scarce, and anything visible in the night sky stood out clearly against the surrounding countryside. It was in this setting, during 1915, that reports emerged of unusual lights seen above the town and nearby fields. Witnesses described lights moving slowly across the sky, with speed typical of modern aircraft. The lights were said to vary in brightness, sometimes appearing steady and at other times dimming before reappearing. They did not produce sound, and their movement was calm enough to allow prolonged observation rather than a momentary glimpse. The sightings were not limited to a single individual, and reports were shared locally. At the time, aviation was still in its infancy, and the lights did not correspond to known aircraft or military activity in the area. Unlike other accounts that repeat or develop over time, the floating lights did not become a regular occurrence. They were seen during a limited period, and then were not reported again in the same way. There were no associated events on the ground, no physical traces, and no further phenomena linked directly to the sightings. The lights were observed, discussed, and then passed into local memory without resolution, and remained recorded as an unexplained event tied to a specific place and moment. In that sense, the story closes not with continuation, but with uncertainty, leaving the sky as empty afterward as it was before. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious and keep watching the shadows. Good night.